Now to some breaking news in the search for the Washington father accused of killing his 3 young daughters. We have learned just about an hour ago that potential sighting of Travis Decker in the Sawtooth National Forest, turned out not to be Decker. This afternoon, the U.S. Marshals Service located the man that multiple witnesses saw in the Sawtooth National Forest, who they believed was Decker. Well, that man cooperated with investigators and said that he was just hiking in the Bear Creek area this past weekend. So at this time, law enforcement has stopped searching for Decker in that part of Idaho.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Geographic Profiler. Let's dive into today's episode. Travis Decker is still on the run after his 3 daughters, Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia, were found murdered at Rock Island Campground in Washington on June 2nd. It is unclear whether Travis Decker is still alive or deceased, but let's look at what we know and see how geographic profiling might help catch a fugitive. The search for Travis Decker has to go back to ground zero, Rock Island Campground. There have been no viable leads and no evidence suggesting that he is alive or deceased. Geographic profiling can be used in 2 ways in the search for Travis. First, it can be applied to the immediate search strategy on the ground. Second, it can be used for a wider investigation into Travis's life, places he may go, and people he might contact. For ground search purposes, Travis's name doesn't really matter. I need to know things like his age, physical characteristics, career choice, and any history of mental health issues. For the longer-term strategy of mapping out Travis's life, his identity is significant in order to map out relationships to people and land. Both the ground search and a wider search for Travis need to happen simultaneously. Both searches will also take into account that Travis may or may not be alive. Law enforcement is taking the right approach by starting a new search around Rock Island Campground using ground searchers and canines trained to detect human remains. I'm going to walk you through how I would develop a geographic profile to assist ground search efforts, as well as a wider investigation for Travis Decker. My profile is unaffected by whether or not Travis is still alive. It is alleged that Travis murdered his 3 daughters, and although the evidence is pointing in that direction, Travis is the only person that truly knows what happened that day. It is my hope that Travis Decker is brought in safe so he can provide some answers, and Whitney Decker, her daughters, and everyone affected find some resolution and justice is served. Before we go any further, let's look at the investigation so far. To do so, I am going to walk you through 3 images and a video from my X account that I posted back in early June. This was the section of Icicle Creek Road that was initially closed off in the search for Travis Decker. Notice the steep and difficult terrain. This would have affected both Decker's movements and search efforts. All the campsites along this green route were closed in the days following the discovery of Decker's 3 girls. This type of terrain proves not only difficult for ground searchers, but also for canines and drone operations. A key factor in the initial search is that volunteer search and rescue operators, the people who really know this land and how to find missing and lost people, were likely sidelined due to safety risks presented by Travis. However, these trained operators were likely advising search efforts behind the scenes. This is a photo of Rock Island Campground where the girls were found. This is a beautiful site, now tarnished by tragedy. We will see shortly why this site is so important in developing a search strategy and a geographic profile. Decker's truck was located nearby, and this was ground zero in the search for Travis Decker. The Enchantments was an area identified in the early days of the search. In recent months and years, I have worked 3 cases in and around the mountainous regions of the Pacific Northwest, and this is as remote as it gets. You may be wondering why Travis might expose himself to such difficult terrain and harsh weather conditions. Well, my profile will help explain this shortly. Officials closed routes, campsites, and hiking trails around Lake Chelan Recreation Area in the early days of the search. The red line is the closed portion of the Pacific Crest Trail. The PCT extends from Canada through the United States to Mexico, and the focus on this section of the trail may be related to Travis's planning and activity in the days leading up to the murder of his daughters. Central to this search and investigation is mental health, which has either been missed, avoided, or ignored in the media. This is not a search for a 32-year-old, 190-pound male who murdered his daughters. This is a search for a 32-year-old male with military training, survival skills, a history of mental health issues, who murdered his 3 daughters and is now a fugitive. With Travis's military background and experience, he is a trained survivalist who is comfortable in a mountain wilderness environment. However, Travis's background and his mental health are at conflict with one another, and we'll get into why. Search and rescue and law enforcement are not necessarily trained in how mental health affects a person's spatial behavior, but it is my job to understand these relationships. I am not a trained psychologist or psychiatrist, and it is always a good idea for law enforcement, search and rescue, and myself to consult someone who is when working a case such as this. With their knowledge of mental health and our knowledge of search strategy and investigations, everyone working together will result in a better and speedier outcome. It was stated in the media that Travis's mental health issues included feelings of isolation, paranoia, borderline personality disorder, and PTSD. In developing a geographic profile, it would be important for me to get a strong understanding of Travis's symptoms, their severity, and his coping mechanisms. Borderline personality traits include impulsivity, idealization and devaluation, self-harm and suicidal thoughts, dissociation, and paranoia. We will see where each one of these comes into play, and I will show that BPD has been a factor in Travis's behavior from day one of this investigation. We are going to set aside the alleged murder of his 3 daughters for the moment, because I don't want to speculate on a motive, but I will say that this event likely heightened emotional instability and activated an emotional anchor point, which we will circle back to. Travis left behind his truck, food, blankets, and his dog. One key trait of borderline personality disorder is impulsivity, which is often indicated by poor planning. Decker left behind everything he needed for food, shelter, comfort, and transportation. He may have been adept at survival, but it does not appear that he planned for an extended stay in the wilderness. Next is the fact that Travis left his dog at the scene of the crime. His dog was apparently taken to the Humane Society to be looked after. This, however, may be an indicator of devaluation. People with BPD often flip between clinging to people and pets one moment and devaluing them and either abandoning them or endangering them the next. In this case, we see both regarding the girls and Decker's dog. While on the topic of poor planning, let's also address the fact that Decker looked up traveling and finding employment in Canada a couple days prior to allegedly murdering his daughters. Could this have been a part of a longer-term plan? Maybe it was an impulsive life change that Decker was looking to make in his life, and at that time, he did not intend to murder his daughters. At this point, we don't have all the answers to these questions. However, it is expected that investigators would notify the proper Canadian authorities in case Decker does attempt to cross the border. Decker also left bloody finger or handprints at the crime scene. Through DNA analysis, it has been confirmed that at least some of this blood came from Travis Decker. As I mentioned previously, possible traits of BPD are self-harm thoughts and suicidal ideations. The presence of this blood may be indicative of this, or it may be unrelated. This investigation is very complex and multifaceted from a behavioral perspective. Let's first look at how an individual with borderline personality disorder might cope in the wilderness. A person living with BPD could face unique challenges coping in a wilderness setting, depending on the severity of their symptoms and the nature of the environment. Many factors play a role: preparedness, social support, past trauma, current mental health status, and survival training. Let's look at some of the BPD traits and what challenges they may present to somebody trying to survive in the wilderness. First, stressors in the wilderness such as isolation, hunger, or exhaustion could intensify emotional dysregulation. Next, we have fear of abandonment. If alone in the wilderness, Feelings of abandonment may spiral into self-harm thoughts or despair. Impulsivity, which we discussed previously, could include risk-taking or self-harm, and these could manifest into unsafe decisions. Unsafe decisions could include wandering off trail, ignoring survival instincts, exposing oneself to inclement weather, and being generally unpredictable. Isolation and hopelessness in the wilderness could heighten thoughts of self-harm or suicidal ideations, especially during perceived failure or extreme emotional pain. Dissociation is also important to consider because it may make survival decisions more difficult. The element of dissociation is particularly important as it applies to Travis Decker because it directly conflicts with his military experience and training. Travis's perception and understanding of who he is may be blurred. A person living with borderline personality disorder may thrive and grow from a wilderness experience, especially if they have strong coping strategies. However, without internal or external support, the emotional and psychological stress of wilderness living can be overwhelming and dangerous. Now, let's add in the element of being a fugitive and hunted by law enforcement. This creates a potentially unstable, emotional, and volatile behavioral profile that also includes intense focus and a survival driven determination. Being hunted may intensify some of those core BPD traits. Even while running and hiding out of fear of abandonment and need for connection, Travis may fantasize about being rescued, forgiven, or about reconnecting with somebody, such as an ex partner or a family member. If Travis has impulsive and risk taking tendencies, he may actually try and reach out to contact someone whom he has an emotional connection with, despite the risk of being apprehended. Travis may also return to places of emotional significance, leave subtle messages, or contact somebody directly. The dissociation element is so important when informing the public to not approach Travis because Travis may switch between playing the survivor, the victim, the monster, and the hero. As law enforcement previously mentioned in their press releases, their survival, but also the impulsive side of Travis, may see him breaking into cabins or trailers to steal supplies. This same side of Travis will also result in sudden movements, changes in direction, and new makeshift campsites. Travis's history of paranoia may result in constant scanning of the environment. He may create defensive traps, and he might misinterpret neutral signs as aggression or being followed. With the mixture of PTSD, paranoia, and the recent trauma of allegedly murdering his children, the wilderness may even trigger PTSD like flashbacks from his days in the military. Now, let's talk about how geographic profiling can help locate Travis Decker. We talked about how a fugitive with borderline personality disorder may roam randomly or veer off marked trails. Travis's movements may also orbit emotionally significant places. When developing a geographic profile, it is common to include anchor points, such as a home, place of work, a favorite vacationing spot, or a hunting cabin. For a person with BPD, you want to also include emotional anchor points. And for Travis, this is going to include Rock Island Campground, other places where he spent time with his children, and likely Whitney Decker's home. To get a clear understanding of Travis's emotional anchor points, investigators should consult Travis's counselor, therapist, or close friends. Travis may stay relatively close and continuously circle these emotional anchor points. He may also display backtracking behavior, where the emotional pull may override survival instincts and rational escape routes. If I was advising ground searchers and law enforcement, I would suggest organizing a new search, starting at Rock Island Campground and working out in a circular but irregular search pattern and including infrequent loops. This would include both land and water searches. There is a strong possibility that Travis remained close to the campground and continues to circle back to the crime scene. I would also suggest installing trail cameras at Rock Island Campground and other emotionally significant places for Travis. Lastly, I would recommend that Whitney Decker's house be monitored and any form of communication or vandalism be investigated. These strategies and recommendations apply whether or not Travis Decker is dead or alive. Looking at the larger picture, if Travis Decker is still alive, he could be anywhere. He would likely be in the United States, but it is possible to cross the Canada-US border undetected. I don't believe this to be the case, as he left his truck at the crime scene. There have been no credible sightings, and there are no crime reports or evidence to suggest he has traveled long distances. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is important to develop a geographic profile to assist investigators with a long-term search strategy. Identifying physical and emotional anchor points and identifying Travis's personal network will help get investigators ahead of Travis rather than constantly in pursuit. Identifying people who Travis not only trusts, but who also sympathize or express loyalty to Travis will be critical for this investigation. Possible sightings of Travis will continue until he is found alive or his body is located. While I did not believe the recent sighting in Idaho was Travis Decker, these leads will continue to come in and must be followed up on. Thanks for listening. Please share and get this information out there. I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the information that law enforcement does, nor do I know all the details surrounding Travis's mental health. However, if this information can provide the public, law enforcement, and those searching for Travis with a small window into his behavior, it may just help bring an end to this devastating ordeal. Everyone involved in this investigation has the same goal of getting answers and seeking justice for Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia. I am Douglas McGregor, and I am the Geographic Profiler.